anchor, Nompumelelo Siziba, who has been bringing the story to us from Parliament this entire morning. Nompumelelo, what's the latest? I really enjoyed your previous conversation with Mr. David Morobe.
Thanks very much, Desiree. Well, very interesting there to listen to the minister saying no austerity. It's going to be very interesting to see the details of his budget. Of course, tax is very important, and that's an area where, of course, he's going to try and raise taxes. But the question is where, because we know that the economy is growing at a snail's pace. People are losing jobs left, right, and centre. How many job losses have we heard about at established firms already this year alone? Massmart and other companies, ArcelorMittal and so on. So it's going to be very interesting. But anyway, to talk further about tax issues, I'm joined here in the parliamentary precinct by Mike Touche. He's the national head of taxation at Mazars, South Africa. And Yamkela Makupola, she's the CEO of Desiree's international law firm. She's also an independent investor. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us. Mike, let me perhaps start with you. What trends have you been seeing in terms of the tax collection over the last number of months? Because we know that traditionally for the past 5 years or so, SARS has just not been managing to catch up in terms of its tax targets, tax revenue raising targets.
Nampula, yeah, you're right. We have been seeing actual collections generally being below target or budgeted projections. So this year in October, when we looked at the October revenue collection figures, one would have thought that against the revised budget, now let's track back a bit, the revised budget was reduced by 52 billion by Treasury in the midterm budget speech, and against that figure we would have expected collections to be at approximately 66% of the total expected, and that's very simplistic on a straight line basis, and they were closer to 58%. If I pulled out the November figures now, recently, that figure you would have expected them to be at 75%. They're at 72%, but when compared to the previous year they were at 71%. So we're tracking very closely to what was expected. That's just on a very simplistic straight line basis. What we then did, we also looked at the revenue collections actually at the end of November, took the difference between last year's collections and the balance and the figure that was collected at the end of November, inflation adjusted it, and we roughly land up where we anticipate that the shortfall could be closer to 25 billion off the revised figure. So it's anywhere between, I would think, 1%, which is the 13 billion, to 25 billion that he might not be able to get to on the revised figures. If you add the original shortfall that they anticipated of 52, we're looking at anything around the 17 billion mark.
That's very positive indeed. And Yamkela, do you think perhaps, we know that SARS has been capacitated quite nicely financially. They got about 1.3 billion rand, I think, at the midterm in order to help boost them and recover from the mess that SARS had become. Do you think to some extent what Mike is telling us is because SARS is probably getting its act together and perhaps better collecting revenue than it was in the past?
Well, definitely. I mean, in the past 2 years, we've seen quite a huge improvement in how they're collecting tax. But also, we're positive with the new governor that has come through, who's also, putting some proper implementation plans to say that we have to be innovative. But also, the sitting of the Davis Tax Committee last year, they had quite some very good recommendations. So there's been a lot coming from the state with regards to making sure that we're improving that, because without that, where else are we going to get the money? But I think where my main concern is for today is investors and South Africans are looking at 3 types of tax for them. The personal income tax, and people are saying we can't afford it anymore, the economy is not growing, and but the tax just keeps going up. As a result, that has a ripple effect now on the economy, because people are too scared to spend because they cannot afford it. Corporate income tax. The investors are saying, why should I set up in South Africa and pay this huge corporate tax when I can go set up in the East or anywhere else that is more tax friendly? So you're finding now that companies, and this is something that we as advisors keep on saying you should not do that, because we want everyone to pay their taxes in South Africa. But you're finding now a lot of companies that are coming through, setting up a head office in South Africa, but they owe a head office in Mauritius, then they just have a branch here because people, and I call it tax avoidance one way or the other, and that's how SARS look at it. But then someone will argue and say, if I have to compare, I'd rather set up on the other side. So we've got to just be innovative because we can't just keep on going to tax every time we need funding for the state. And most importantly is the VAT. Everyone is worried because that talks to the crux of our people on the ground. They're the ones that suffer the most if this VAT is increased today. So those are the three types of tax that I think everyone just wants to know what's going to happen. I think with regards to fuel, we're going to see that going up, maybe to 15 rands per litre, but I don't think it doesn't bring us much money. I mean, we'll make 1.3 billion or so there, and the state needs to fund, most of these projects and everything that's coming through. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Mike?
Talk about the competitiveness of our corporates. That's something that we've been saying. Maybe we should actually be a little bit innovative and reduce income tax rates. So reduce the corporate tax rate from 20%, 28%, say maybe down to 25% or 24%. Now, if you consider the UK, they're going to be close to 19% tax rate. The US is 21%. Why come to South Africa? So I think we got to really think of being a bit competitive if we want to get that investment into this country in order to grow the economy.
Mike, we know that VAT will be politically sensitive, given the protests that we're hearing outside. And of course, my colleague Mariska Botha was just giving a report on that. But even though it is politically sensitive, do you think that's the only thing that the governor really has, not the governor, pardon me, the finance minister has to play with?
Look, the beauty about VAT, it's a very simple mechanism to increase the tax take. A 1% increase will equate roughly to approximately 25 billion collection. So to legislate it, to implement it, it's extremely difficult. But as Yangela said, it really hits the people on the ground, and it's not the greatest. It actually is regressive. The one positive factor to that is a certain part of our economy that I don't think is even in the tax net. And it might well be taxed or affected by that increase in VAT, which will then not be so negative. But it is a negative tax, I think, for most of our population and a lot of our poorer people and a lot of our unemployed people. So, yeah, it's a tightrope. Can he possibly increase other areas and not touch the VAT? And that I think is something that we possibly will hear this afternoon.
Very tricky indeed. One last thing I wanted to ask Yamkela. We saw that a law went through where South Africans who go out and earn an income in other jurisdictions internationally, they're now also going to be liable to tax here in South Africa. What are the implications of that? We're already hearing that because the marginal tax is already at 45% in terms of personal income tax, people are choosing to financially emigrate. Any concerns on your part around that, simply because we have such a small tax base in South Africa, and if people who are high net worth individuals or middle class individuals choose to leave the country because of these additional taxes, it will make an impact?
Firstly, just to define the law, it's also, goes to say that if you are in South Africa for quite a number of days in a year, so there's people there that are excluded in that law. So if you're in South Africa majority of your time, I'm just making an example, then you should be paying tax in South Africa. And for me, that makes a lot of sense. Do you get my point? The only thing is, how much tax are we talking about? And that's where the agitation then comes in. But if you're spending most of your time in South Africa lawfully, because this is where you're doing your spending, this is where you're buying, this is this is where you're doing your living, and your cost of living is in South Africa. So I motivate that then you should be then paying your taxes in South Africa, but there has to be a certain percentage that is limited, because like Mike was saying, you look at the UK, you look at other even neighboring countries to us, people are having options. I keep saying that as South Africa, we see ourselves as the leader, the economic leader of Africa, but then we're also seeing Ethiopia that is coming up with quite good options for investors. So we've got to be innovative. The law, I think it makes sense.
I'll let you have the last word, Mike. Your final expectations of the Finance Minister later today.
Sure, I think he's tasked with he's got a big task ahead of him. You want a budget that is going to be growth positive. We can't carry on growing at less in population growth for the long periods that we have had. He's got to do something about the SOEs. Hopefully he can put something on the table, as opposed to just going around in a circle, which we seem to be doing. And of course we've got to look at unemployment as well. So I think it's going to be a hard ask for him. He's got to try and get something in this budget that can stimulate growth, because I think at the end of the day, growth is possibly the only way we're going to get out of the doldrums we are in. It solves a lot of problems. It assists unemployment. It gets tax revenues up, and all those good things. So I think that I'd like to see from him is a growth-orientated budget, and maybe some bold moves, as I possibly mentioned, possible reduction in corporate tax rates, some incentives. But he's got really little wiggle room to go with, because his collections are down in any case. But I think SARS, just coming back to SARS themselves, I think there seems to be a new spirit in that organisation. The new commissioner has done something positive there, and definitely we're seeing from a recipient of their service that it is actually has stepped up. So well done to him.
Super. Thank you very much to my guests. Well, like they say, very little wiggle room for the Finance Minister. The International Monetary Fund basically said exactly the same thing. Raising taxes whichever way is going to be very tricky indeed. And the only solution is for those structural reforms that we've heard about for a number of years. Are they going to bite the bullet and take some tough decisions in this regard? Well, we only have to wait and see, and we'll see that at 2 o'clock. My guests were Mike Touche. He's the National Head of Taxation at Mazars South Africa, and Yamkela. She's from Desiree's international law firm, Africa. She represents the Africa unit, and she's an independent investor. Back to you, Desiree.
Thank you so much, Nompu. Earlier on, we